Hello and welcome back to week 2 of our online course, Food for Thought. I hope you all enjoyed last week's session. If you chose to do any of the suggested further reading, I hope you found those resources useful. Our live and interactive session is coming up in 2 weeks' time on the 11th of November at 1 p.m. Irish time. This session is going to be hosted by Self-Help Africa's Director of Programmes, Orla Kilcullen. If you have any questions arising from the sessions that you've attended, you can keep a record of these and you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions for a Q&A with Orla. You're going to receive more details by email in the coming weeks. Last week, we met Margaret Ngeta, who introduced the course from Kenya. This week, I'll introduce you to Hugh Bergin, based in Ireland, who is part of Self-Help Africa's development education team. In this session, we'll look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Hugh will share with you the origin and the objective of these 17 goals, the 3 pillars of sustainability, and how the goals inform our programs at Self-Help Africa. Once again, you can watch this video at your leisure, and the links on the webpage will direct you to further reading resources if you'd like to learn more about the 2030 Global Goals. We hope you enjoyed this session.
Hello, I'm Hugh Bergin, and today we're going to focus on the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. What are they? In a nutshell, they are 17 global goals created in 2015 by the United Nations to address poverty, inequality and injustice, as well as our environmental and climate crisis. In this presentation, we're going to look at how they came about, how they work, and ask why are they important. And we'll also note some criticisms of the SDGs. We'll start by breaking down that term a bit, the Sustainable Development Goals. Like, what is development? Why is it necessary? And how do we do it? So the word development, people can find it difficult to explain or describe. Maybe you'll agree it's generally understood to mean change for the better, an improvement in a country's economic and social conditions. Basically, an improvement in people's lives in a society. And so now I'm just going to give a brief word on development aid. And starting off by distinguishing between humanitarian aid and longer-term development aid. The first is a natural response to our fellow human beings suffering due to natural or man-made disasters such as famine, tsunamis, earthquakes, refugee crises. Longer-term development aid is attempts by wealthier countries to help living conditions in poorer ones. How to do that right has always been argued over. The traditional approach to development aid was that poorer, undeveloped countries, if you like, needed to follow a particular formula to catch up with the wealthier global north countries, who would show them how to do it. Theories have evolved somewhat to where most now accept it isn't up to developed countries, or anyone else for that matter, to instruct other countries how they should develop. Each country must decide their own direction, of course. Development aid could be seen as an evolution of international involvement of powerful countries in others, from the days of colonialism to more recently globalization and the push for free trade. What we understand as development aid really got going after the Second World War. With destroyed economies, international cooperation was needed. During the Cold War, the West, for example, was keen to counteract the danger of poorer countries drifting towards communism. US President Truman He had a famous phrase, winning their hearts and minds was the policy. And the Soviet Union offered solidarity and assistance for exploited countries. They too, like the West, they needed allies. When we look at the international development landscape, there are three parts to it, if you like, three actors. Number one, what are known as the multilateral organizations, such as the United Nations, the European Union, the World Bank. These act on behalf of their member countries. Secondly, the individual states. Our government in Ireland implements policy through Irish Aid, its overseas aid programme, which on behalf of the Irish people supports NGOs like Self-Help Africa, as well as contributing to the multilaterals and providing direct aid to some countries. And the third part, if you like, to the international development landscape are such as organizations such as ourselves, NGOs, civil society, and social movements. In Ireland, our involvement in international development goes back to our missionary tradition, particularly in health and in education. And we were not a colonial power. In fact, having had the experience of being colonized ourselves often helped. NGOs, in a way, took over from the missionary orders, particularly in response to catastrophes in Africa in the 1960s and the 1970s. With the advent of TV, pictures of disasters were broadcast into people's living rooms. So Irish NGOs were seen as neutral. What that means is our assistance and our support wasn't conditional on anything, like political support or access to markets, that kind of thing. So from that early involvement, Ireland remains one of the best respected countries in the world of development. So that's an outline of what we mean when we talk about development. Sustainable development means we need to consider what's ahead of us. In our striving for development, are we damaging our environment or depleting the Earth's resources for future generations? So we got sustainable development goals. Goals, we know what a goal is. For example, a personal goal is something we aim towards achieving, or a new business might have a goal, such as increasing sales. That's a bit of context to what we're looking at today, the SDGs, or global goals, as they're also known. This video is a general introduction to the idea of the SDGs and what they're about.
Everyone, waiting in line for your morning coffee, you scroll social media and news on your phone. What you find depresses you. Thousands of migrants are fleeing a civil war, risking their lives only to be turned back at borders. Speculations have sent the housing markets into a frenzy, and employment numbers are tumbling down. Journalists have uncovered a decades-long cover-up of child abuse by coaches and doctors within competitive gymnastics in your country. Closing the news app, you open your family group chat. Maybe one of your siblings has posted something funny, and at this rate, you could use some cheering up. The group chat has blown up overnight, and what you see makes your heart sink. Bushfires are raging again, and there's one burning only 2 suburbs over from where your cousins live. Everyone is frantic with worry. At this point, you walk away, coffee in hand, tense, miserable, and confused. You think, this can't go on. Something needs to be done. Someone needs to step up. We need a plan to fix all this social injustice, economic chaos, and environmental destruction. This is where the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, come in. Fixing the kinds of problems that bring your entire day down in the morning coffee line can't happen in just one way. The SDGs cover sustainability from different angles: socially, economically, and environmentally. They set global goals for the 3 Ps: people, planet, and prosperity. The SDGs form the heart of the 2030 Agenda, an action plan adopted by all 193 countries of the United Nations. They call for decent jobs, quality education, good health, gender and income equality, clean energy and water, biodiversity, and climate action. They aim to reach sustainable development by 2030. Governments play a key role in achieving these goals, but they're not the only players. Businesses, civil society, indigenous leaders, academia, and the general public all contribute as well. You might wonder where they came from. The SDGs were born in 2012 at the Rio+20, a UN conference on sustainable development in Rio de Janeiro, which was the largest conference ever held by the UN. Until 2012, there were different international agreements that dealt with environmental challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss. And there were the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, that aimed to achieve certain social targets in developing countries by the year 2015. The countries meeting at Rio+20 decided that a more comprehensive set of universal goals was needed to tackle the urgent social, economic, and environmental challenges facing the world. This kicked off the broadest consultation ever run by the UN. An unprecedented effort was made to get input from as many people as possible, particularly those who don't often get a say in international agreements. Over 10 million people around the world participated in the consultations and helped shape the SDGs. Apart from national governments, major stakeholder groups that were consulted included women, children and youth, indigenous peoples, NGOs, local authorities, workers and trade unions, business and industry, scientific and technological community, and farmers. I am pleased to share some good news for people and planet, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said to a packed room of press delegates. The good news? After 3 years of negotiations and debate, 193 countries had agreed to a set of development goals more bold and ambitious than anything that has come before them, the SDGs. The due date for the SDGs is the year 2030, which makes the 2020s the decade to deliver. But how can we know if progress on any of these monumental issues has been made? The 17 SDGs are built on an evidence-based framework of 169 quantitative targets and 232 indicators that accompany them. This ensures that the SDGs are clear, concise, time-bound, and measurable, which helps governments and decision-makers to include the SDGs in their planning. This means that we can keep track on each of the SDGs' progress. To achieve the SDGs, all countries are expected to set up policies and investment plans, and to use the targets and indicators to track their progress. They then report their progress to the UN. This is done through voluntary national reviews, VNRs, with a selection of countries reporting each year. Most countries, including Australia, have already submitted their first VNR. Governments are crucial in achieving the SDGs because they create and finance policies that support the goals. But all stakeholders have an important role to play. Industries and businesses in finding solutions for goods and services that align with the SDGs, and communities and individuals in supporting SDG initiatives and in holding governments and the private sector to account. Education, research, and innovation are all essential to achieve the SDGs. So universities, with their ability to create and disseminate knowledge and solutions, play an absolutely vital role. You can probably already tell that reaching the SDGs will be no small feat. All responses, from the global to the national to the local, even down to the individual, need to be coherent and aligned. But progress to date has been slow, so that it becomes very clear now that a much deeper, faster, and more ambitious response is needed from governments, businesses, and communities. Many experts say that in order to achieve the SDGs, we need societal transformations now that are unprecedented in human history and which represent a profound departure from business as usual. You may feel like the challenges are too big and too many. After all, you're just one person. But think about it this way. Every time you spend money, you have an opportunity to spend your money better. Every time you talk to someone, you have an opportunity to challenge their ideas for the better. You can seize these opportunities every day, 365 days a year. And of course, every couple of years, you have the opportunity to vote for the better, not just in national elections, but in local ones too. That is an immense potential that lies with you and every other individual. The SDGs give us a roadmap for making the right choices and arriving at the right answers. Don't forget, together, we are 7.8 billion people. Together, we can make big changes happen.
As we saw in the video, the SDGs were introduced in 2015 by the United Nations. Did you know that the UN was created after the Second World War, when more than 50 countries came together, realizing there needed to be a kind of mechanism to prevent wars like that again? In addition to maintaining peace and security, other important objectives, including developing friendly relations among countries based on respect the principles of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. Also, achieving worldwide cooperation to solve international economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian problems. Another one was respecting and promoting human rights and serving as a center where countries can coordinate their actions and activities towards these various ends. Today, it's argued in our increasingly interconnected world, it's no use retreating behind closed doors and just looking after our own affairs. There's an even greater need for cooperation because issues such as global pandemics and, of course, climate change, they don't observe borders. In the year 2000, the UN came up with the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, of which there were 8. However, they didn't address the root causes of poverty, and they overlooked gender inequality, as well as the interconnected nature of development. What I mean by that is it's generally accepted that trying to fix or solve problems without taking into account the many other issues impacting people's lives is not going to work. For example, tackling global hunger, we need to address many other concerns such as education, nutrition, unfair economic systems, climate change. The list can be very long. Similarly, each of these issues are interconnected with others. So the first step is to acknowledge there's no silver bullet. The MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, had mixed success and many disappointments. Mainly, it is agreed because they were a plan devised by UN officials for the developing world or poorer countries. So lessons having been learned, this time the Sustainable Development Goals, instead of being top down, were agreed upon by an extensive participatory process involving representatives from global civil society as well as governments. The UN realized that the global goals were to be adopted by people, they needed to get buy-in from everybody. And so began the largest exercise in public consultation the world has known. Over 3 years, all the world's governments, as well as importantly, civil society groups, had an opportunity to contribute. The aims were to end extreme poverty and hunger, improve access to health and education, make cities more sustainable, combat climate change, and to protect forests and oceans. Of course, there resulted a huge wish list, which was whittled down to 17 goals. Enough, it was believed, to cover the main concerns of sustainable development, but not too many as to lose effectiveness. The plan is to achieve these goals by 2030. A big difference between the Sustainable Development Goals and their predecessor, the Millennium Development Goals, is that the SDGs are universal. That means they're for everyone on the planet, not just seen as solutions for the poorer countries.
We can be.
We must be the first generation
to end extreme poverty.
The generation
Most determined
to fight injustice
and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done.
The global goals.
a 15-year plan
For everyone, everywhere.
with no one left behind.
We will live in a world
where nobody
anywhere lives in extreme poverty.
Where no one
goes hungry.
Where no one
Wakes in the morning.
Asking if there will be food today.
We will live in a world
where no child has to die.
Diseases we know how to cure.
And where proper health care
is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world
Where everyone
Goes to school.
and education gives us the knowledge
And skills
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities
to thrive
and be powerful
and safe.
We cannot succeed if half the world is headed.
We will live in a world
where all people can get clean water
And proper toilets at home,
at school, and at work.
We will live in a world where
there is sustainable energy for everyone.
heat, light,
And power for the whole planet.
without destroying the planet.
We'll live in a world where economies prosper.
and new wealth.
Leads to decent jobs
for everyone.
and we will live in a world
Where our industry,
Our infrastructure and our
best innovations,
Are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
we will live in a world
Where prejudices and extremes of inequality
Are defeated.
inside our countries,
And between different countries.
where people live in cities and communities
that are safe, progressive,
and support everyone who lives there.
where we replace
What we consume.
Planet where we put back.
What we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back the threat of
climate change.
where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas.
will restore and protect
Life on land,
The forests.
Animals, the earth itself.
With peace between and inside countries.
Where all governments are open.
and answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
And the justice rules.
with everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people.
Work together.
Partnerships of all kinds.
To make these goals a reality.
These are the United Nations global goals.
For sustainable development.
Let's get to work.
So how do the UN intend to ensure that the goals get achieved? Well, each goal is divided up into a number of targets. There are 169 targets. And these targets are measured by indicators. There's 232 indicators. Indicators are statistics or actions that monitor progress towards the goals. Fortunately, we don't need to remember each goal, target, and indicator. There's quite a simple way to look at it all. All of the 17 goals fit into what are called the 3 pillars of sustainability: social, economic, and environmental. Social is to do with people, for example, health, education, social inclusion. Economic is fairly self-explanatory, to do with the economy, employment, fair distribution of income, and environmental is obvious. Biodiversity, our natural environment, the oceans, and of course, climate. So that's it. All the SDGs can be boiled down to those 3 pillars of sustainability. So development is not considered sustainable unless it is economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable. There are a few cross-cutting themes in the 17 goals too, like gender equality. Even though there's a goal dedicated to that, progress on any and all of the SDGs will be stalled if women's empowerment and gender equality is not prioritized. Education for sustainable development is another cross-cutting issue. This enables individuals to contribute to sustainable development by promoting societal, economic, and political change, as well as by transforming their own behavior. By adopting the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN member states, each of the countries, committed to an ambitious plan of action, using the goals to frame their agendas and political policies over the following 15 years. So that's where their effectiveness and their potential can be seen. These goals help to frame the agendas and political policies of the countries that signed up. But how do we know the SDGs are being pursued enthusiastically enough? It's all very well governments paying lip service to them, According to what we read, we seem to be heading towards a climate crisis, for example. So although unanimously agreed, the goals are not legally binding. Unsurprising really is how could it realistically happen that 193 countries all agree on exact wording? The goals are a promise made by all countries to each other to work together on a plan. Having signed up to the SDGs, governments can be held to account by their citizens if they're not living up to their commitments. So, for example, we in Ireland can hold our government to account if they're not actually living up to what their commitments are. And significantly, this can translate into votes. Politicians will listen if it affects their votes. And actually, governments do take account of their reputation internationally. So while it would be preferable the SDGs are legally enforceable, governments are still being pressured into upholding them. All 193 UN member states are required to produce at least one voluntary national review, as it's called, a report in which they assess and present progress they've made towards achieving the SDGs. Now, I did mention at the beginning that there are criticisms, and one of them is that the SDGs don't address the causes of poverty or inequality. In fact, it's true to say it uses the tools of neoliberalism to fight the effects of neoliberalism. As an example, Goal 8 is sustainable economic growth. And one of the targets is to increase GDP, gross domestic product. That would be seen as really self-defeating. So I'd like to show you a slide here to illustrate this particular criticism. Last year, IDEA, which is the Irish Development Education Association based here in Dublin, had their annual conference, and they had a guest speaker from the UN. His name was, or is, Philip Alston. And I want to show you this quote by Philip. He said the SDG agenda, quote, conveniently sidesteps necessary questions around wealth redistribution, elite capture of economic gains, growth achieved through carbon emissions, and inequitable fiscal policies. It treats inequality reduction as a problem to be solved through overall income growth, which flies in the face of recent history and is even more deeply problematic in light of the impacts of COVID-19 and climate change. What the goals do, however, is they focus the governments of the world, their attention on the issues that need to be addressed. And more importantly, the goals raise awareness among the world's population. And that something can be done. What's the alternative? Is that we keep on ignoring the issues? Self-Help Africa's own program activities in Africa have at their core the primary global goals of achieving a world free from poverty and from hunger. We also implement work that responds to a wide variety of the other SDGs, the other goals, including projects that deliver a more gender equal world, that improves access to safe and clean water, that supports sustainability, and that also encourages collaboration and partnership. We also support projects that address the challenges of climate change. That's a big part of our programs, and that protects our life on land ecosystems. Finally, I just want to wrap up. I want to show you this short video, which is a reminder of another important part of the global goals, which is that phrase, leave no one behind. So it might be fine that, a lot of people are getting covered by these goals, but what about the people that don't have a voice, that are left behind? So that this video is a reminder of that.
I was refugee in Pakistan. I was refugee in Iran. I was refugee in Dubai. And now I'm a refugee in France.
Les gens, quand tu es handicapé, ils n'essaient même pas de voir ce que tu es capable de faire, mais ils te jugent à travers ton handicap.
Haberme vendido no fue una buena idea.
यहाँ की लड़कियां कुछ नहीं कर सकती।
लाइट रहित, उजियार रहित, हमरो बाल बचाव उजियार रहित.
Agama me fumidan bem e só na me bem, mas que na me corta.
Porque se todo mundo tivesse alimento em casa, ela podia raciocinar. Então, poderia ser pobre, mas teria inteligência na cabeça para poder sair dali.
Parce que na mukili mutu azwa na mission na onzamba tindelai. Ngape na za mukili pona mission na ngai me nzambe ndayebi.
I've left my husband to be with a woman, and for me that's a huge step in my country as an African woman to do that. I do have a strong voice and I'm strong as a woman speaking for myself.
Nous devons dire au monde que nous existons, que vous êtes là. Et je suis sûr qu'aucune misère, aucune pauvreté extrême n'est pas une fatalité. On peut la combattre.
Mba afaka ihany fa mba tsy hitovy amin'le hoe toerana nisy atsony zany fa mba lasa ambonimbony tokoa zany izy. Dia tany koa moa ny reniny dia fa mihina teo zany any Termiana.